Hi there, Keith from North 40 Fly Shop in Omak, Washington. If you stillwater fish, chances are you have a number of leech patterns in your box. Most are tied with either semi-sealed dubbing or some type of dubbing material for body and or tail. Marabou, rabbit, squirrel, you name it, there are many variations to it. Most also have either some type of weight to them, whether it's bead or lead wrapped on the shank, or some may not be tied with any weight. Using a sinking line like most people do, that gets the pattern down, but the problem is sometimes you get too deep with them when you're trying to strip them back. What I'm going to show you is basically I'm taking a Hale Bopp Leech pattern and I'm adding something a little bit different to it. What I'm doing is the underbody along the shank of the hook is wrapped in foam. What this does is it causes the leech pattern to rise in the water column if you're fishing it with a full sinking line. When you strip it, it'll go down. When you pause, it rises up. What this does a lot of times, when it rises and it stops at the top of the rise, that's when you'll get a strike on it. So let's get started. And the material that you're going to be using, first off, is your thread. I'm using a red UTC 70 denier. One thing when you're doing these rising leech patterns is use a color for the head that will accent the pattern itself, but it's something that you normally would not use on a leech pattern. In other words, if you're tying an olive leech, a lot of times you'll use black or olive. Use a color and know that every fly tied with that color, your leeches, is going to be a rising leech or a floating type leech pattern. And the next thing is, of course, it's your hooks. Most of the leech patterns I tie, excuse me, are in a size 10, and I use a 2X long. So basically I'm using the 730 Dai-Riki in a size 10. Next, of course, the important part that we were talking about is your foam. 1mm Rainey's sheet foam in white. You can change the color if you need to, but I just most of the time use white. For the body, semi-sealed by Troutman is what we carry, and we're doing it in Peacock this time. For the tail, which I like to use a lot of, is the barred Marabou, and this is olive Marabou, and it's the Montana Fly Company's Marabou. And of course, you got to have a little flash in the tail. So I'm just using my favorite, which is the Krinkle mirror flash in the pearl. Alrighty. Okay. A little prep work before you start tying is you want to take and cut about a 1/8 thickness or width strip of your foam, because that's about the right size to work with it. So into the vise, we're going to stick our number 10 hook, like such. Get our thread started. And we're going to run that almost to the bend. Okay, we got our hook dressed here, and so we're going to take our 1/8 inch foam strip here, and I cut a little angle on it to make it easier to tie in. You just want to be careful not to over tie it. Tie it too tight, I should say. And we'll run that forward. Okay. And you can play around with 1mm or 1/2 millimeter, depending on hook size, whatever you want to use. Whatever will actually make the fly float or rise up. So once we get up to the eye, we just cinch her down real good. Now then, when you're wrapping back on your thread, you don't want to cinch it too tight because you don't want to collapse the foam too much, but you want to wrap it on there good and tight so it stays in place and does rotate. So there we go. Next step is your Marabou. So you want to go through and find a good one. And once you have it, you want it about hook shank length. And then what I do is I kind of strip off a lot of the fibers off of the stems gently, and then get that tied into place. Kind of loose it first, and then we'll come back through and get it down real good. Now then, the other thing I like to do is take a couple of thread wraps underneath, and what that does is just kind of helps the Marabou so it doesn't completely sag down. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to build our dubbing loop. Some people do, some people don't. I like to wax my thread. It just gives a little bit more to help holding it on. And then we're going to advance our thread forward. And you might want to kind of keep it semi close to each other as you're going forward. That little bit of red sometimes shines through, and it always helps. Alright. Okay, so the one thing I've noticed about some of these flies is that being sparse doesn't hurt one bit. Get our semi-sealed dubbing in place, kind of spread it out a little bit so it doesn't clump up in one particular spot over another. And we'll get some. And I kind of forgot one important thing here, so we're going to go back real quick. That is, got the tire flash in. All is not lost. So you want to put the flash in right after you put the tail on, generally. But because I kind of forgot, we'll just muddle through it. And if you can carefully manipulate it, you can get her in just fine. And you want your flash about the length of the Marabou or the tail. There we go. Now we can go back forward. Give our dubbing loop a spin. And then what we want to do is brush some of this out a little bit. You just want to be careful you don't brush it out too hard because it'll break the thread, since we're only using 70 denier. Alright. We're going to wrap that forward. And usually you want to try and sweep some of the material behind so it faces backwards. And doesn't have to be tight touching. Loose touching is okay on the wraps. Because like I said before, we want to kind of make this a little bit sparse looking. There we go. Clean up the head a little bit. You want a nice red color here so that you'll know that it's a buoyant leech or a rising leech. Put a whip finish on it. Such. And then we're going to brush out our semi-seal again. Kind of want to hold your tail, your Marabou a little bit so it doesn't get damaged when you're brushing. There we go. And a good brushing back. There you go. A little trim of a few arrant fibers. This thing will fish it with a full sinking line, or you can fish it with a full sinking line and a booby tip, depending on how high up in the water column you want it to go. When you strip it, it'll rise up, or excuse me, when you strip it, it'll go down, pause, it rises up, and it's the rise up, a lot of times when it gets to the top of its rise and it pauses, a lot of times it's when the fish will hit it. Put a little head cement on there and we're good to go. Good luck to you, and let me know how you do.